Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Got a new video for you today talking about my Gix Yawgmoth Praetor deck. Break this down for you guys, show you that you can have a lot of fun with this deck, drawing a lot of cards, and also being very efficient with your deck and maybe even your opponents. So let's break it down here. Let's start off with the commander Gix Yawgmoth Praetor, 1 in double black for a 3/3 legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor. He has the ability of whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, his controller may pay 1 life. If they do, they draw a card. Yes, that is symmetrical, so that means your opponents can also draw cards if they hit another one of your opponents. So it is a little bit group huggy, but that'll also keep some heat off of us because our opponents will also want to draw cards. And then has a second ability of pay 4 and triple black, discard X cards, exile the top X cards of target opponent's library. You may play lands and cast spells from among cards exiled this way without paying their mana costs. So when we read this commander, I'm thinking of a few things here. We're going to want to build a board, draw lots of cards, and win with one big turn. So building a board is going to be really easy, as I'll get into very shortly here. We have a lot of evasive 1-drops and 2-drops, so we're going to be taking advantage of Gix's first ability very easily, drawing lots of cards in the early to mid game, and then ramping up our mana, so that way we can have one big turn in the late game with some of the spells and combos that I'll get into later on as we get into this deck tech here. So let's start off with our ramp. Ramp is very important even in a deck with as low a converted mana cost curve as this one. We still want to be able to get Gix out very early and get our 1-drops out really fast before we play Gix, so that way we can take advantage of his first ability the turn that we play Gix. So Soul Ring, everyone plays Soul Ring, everyone knows Mana Crypt. They'll both help you get Gix out really fast. Jeweled Lotus gets Gix out on turn 1. Chrome Mox imprints another card from your hand. We are playing a lot of cards that you can just throw away to Chrome Mox, and these kinds of effects are really not too bad for our deck. The card disadvantage doesn't really mean anything if we're just going back up to 7 cards very fast in the early game. Mox Diamond, same thing, discard a land. They both will add black for us. Lotus Petal, 1-time use to make a black mana. All these are great effects for us to get Gix out. Mox Opal, Metalcraft, add a mana to our mana pool, activate only if we have 3 or more artifacts. That stipulation is pretty easy to achieve because we are playing Vault of Whispers, which is the artifact land, and we are also playing some artifact creatures as well as all of our other mana sources here. So it should be easy to turn Mox Opal on. And then Springleaf Drum, 1 mana, tap an untapped creature you control, add a mana of any color. This works out pretty well for us to help us develop our board. There will always be 1 creature that we can just play. It'll have Summoning Sickness, we're not going to block with it, so we'll just tap it to the Springleaf Drum to play another 1-drop, or to hold up interaction maybe, or even in the later game there'll be some creatures that we just can't get in with anymore because their evasiveness is either flying or death touch, or maybe so no one has swamps and we could just use it for the Springleaf Drum ability. So this is a pretty good utility artifact for us to get more mana. And then Jet Medallion, we're playing a mono black deck. We want our spells to all cost 1 less. This will pull tons of weight for our deck. We do have a few mana source ramp pieces as well. Dark Ritual, 1 mana, add 3. Cabal Ritual, 2 mana, add 3, but if we have Threshold, which means we have 7 cards in our graveyard, 5 mana instead. That's pretty easy to achieve in this deck. Culling the Weak, 1 black, sack a creature, add 4 black to your mana pool. Like I said, we're playing a bunch of 1-drops that we can just throw away to the spell whenever they're not useful anymore, or whenever we're going for a big turn, we could just easily sack 1 creature to add 4 mana. And then Blood Pet. Blood Pet allows us to get turn 2 Gix, or we could just have it hang around, possibly get in there if no one leaves up any blockers. We can just get in for 1 and draw a card with him, but he is also a mana source. Next up, we're going to get into our evasive creatures here. A lot of these are going to be 1-drops because I think that playing the 1-drop first, playing 2 1-drops versus 1 2-drop that might be slightly better, is going to be more efficient because we're able to deploy them twice as fast. First up, Changeling Outcast, can't block and can't be blocked. It's a 1 mana 1/1. Tormented Soul, 1 mana 1/1, can't block and can't be blocked. These are just the best cards in our deck for sure. They're 1 mana and you don't have to ever worry about them dying in combat. They will always get us cards. Ginger Brute, 1 mana 1/1 haste. We can pay 1 to make him so he can't be blocked except by creatures with haste, and then you can pay 2 and sack him to gain 3 life. The second text box there with the gain 3 life is usually not relevant, but him having haste is super relevant. In the early game, if we drop a Ginger Brute on the same turn as Gix, we can usually just get in and draw on the same turn, which is insanely good. And the 1-mana ability to make him unblockable basically is always very good. Quag Vampires 1-mana 1/1. The multi-kicker is flavor text. We just care about it having Swamp Walk. As we'll get into, we obviously have Urborg in this deck, so anytime we draw Urborg, all of our Swamp Walk creatures are going to be able to be unblockable. But there's always one person playing black that you can get in on. Not very often do I see someone not playing black at my tables these days. We have a bunch of other Swamp Walk creatures. Here's a Plague Beetle, 1-mana 1/1 Swamp Walk, and Zodiac Rat, 1-mana 1/1 Swamp Walk. You don't necessarily have to play the Zodiac Rat, is $30 just because it's from Portal 3 Kingdoms, but I think it's funny to tell people that I play a $30 1-drop. Prickly Bogart, 1-mana 1/1 with Fear. Fear is a pretty good keyword. That means it can't be blocked except by artifact creatures or black creatures, so we can usually get in on someone who's either not playing black or they just don't have any artifacts. There's usually one person that we can get in with this. Vampire Cutthroat, 1-mana 1/1 with Skulk and Lifelink, so it can't be blocked by creatures with greater power than 1. Most of the time, we'll be able to get in with one person on this. The only times I've been sad with this is when there's a token deck or someone just leaves up a 1/1 just because they just don't decide to do anything with it, and you basically can't attack them with this. But the Lifelink is also very good to de-incentivize Gix's life loss. We're going to be losing a lot of life in this deck with Gix's ability, along with other black spells. So having the lifelink on him also allows us to kind of recuperate the life loss. Same with Vampire the Dire Moon. This time it has Death Touch instead of the last one with Skulk. Death Touch is slightly worse than Skulk just because they can block it. So you kind of want to swing this at someone who doesn't want to block it. Like, they'll have their 4-mana commander out. They're not going to trade with a 1/1 Death Touch. Most of the time it can get in, and the lifelink is also very good. Hopogeopor, 1-mana 1/1 flyer. We can sack it until next turn. Target player who is dealt damage by Hopogeopor this turn can't cast non-creature spells. That text can be useful for when we decide to cast a big X spell or go for a combo win. We don't want the blue player casting a counter spell on us, so we can use it for that ability, but most of the time it's just going to be a 1-mana 1/1 flyer that gets in for us. Blightkeeper, 1-mana 1/1 flyer with flavor text. Fairy Dream Thief, 1-mana 1/1 flying. When it enters, we get some card selection with a Surveil, and then you can pay 3 and exile it from your graveyard to draw a card and lose a life. That text has actually been useful for me when I've played this deck. There'll just be some times where I'm holding up interaction and then no one does anything that makes me want to use it, and I'm just like, okay, draw a card, and then go to my turn. Nightshade Stinger, 1-mana 1/1 flying, can't block. Battlefly Swarm, 1-mana 1/1 flying, and you can pay a black to give it Death Touch. So you could just go to combat and then cast your spells on your second main phase, so that way you can pretend to hold up a mana for the Death Touch, so that way they won't block it. Eye Collector, 1-mana 1/1 flying. When it deals combat damage to a player, each player puts the top card of their library in your graveyard. Kind of whatever, just everyone mills one. Eye Twitch, 1-mana 1/1 flying. When it dies, learn. We obviously can't play learn cards, so it's just going to discard a card and draw a card for us. This is Pilfering Imp. It's a 1-mana 1/1 flying, and you can pay 2 and sacrifice it to make someone discard a non-land card, and you can activate it only as a sorcery. Sorry, it's in a different language. I couldn't find one in English that wouldn't look like poopy poo. Sturge, 1-mana 1/1, insect bat flyer, can't block, and you could pay 2 and sacrifice it and pay 1 life to draw a card. Sometimes when we just need a draw card, we can just sacrifice it, or response to a board wipe, you can just get rid of it. Basilica Screecher, 2-mana 1/2 flyer with Extort. If you haven't noticed, we're playing a lot of 1-drops in this deck, so Extort will be a very valid way for us to drain our opponents to a life total where we can just take them out of the game. Extort, very good in this deck. Vault Scourge, 1 and a Phyrexian 1/1 flying lifelink. Lifelink and the flying is very good, and if we have Jet Medallion, this is free. Just so good in this deck. Nether Trader, double black, 1/1 haste and shadow, and whenever a creature is put into your graveyard from play, you may pay a black. If you do, return Nether Trader from your graveyard to play. This card is very good in our deck. Very good. It has haste and it's unblockable, and it comes back. What more can we ask? We Scout, 2-mana 1/1 with Horsemanship. Basically means unblockable. No one plays Horsemanship. Dothy Voidwalker. Yep, he's in this deck because he's very good and he just happens to have Shadow. Also, I should mention to you guys, other people play Dothy Voidwalker. Dothy Voidwalker is a good card, so just remember that when you're attacking with Shadow, that their Dothy Voidwalkers can trade or possibly just kill off your creatures. So just remember that. Very good graveyard hate piece as well. Moving on to our other creatures that are very good in this deck. Dark Confidant, as you saw that our curve is very, very low, so we're going to get some extra card draw off of this, and sometimes we might even be able to get in on someone who doesn't have any blockers. Just kind of does both for us. Creeping Bloodsucker, same kind of deal, can get in with no one with blockers, but most of the time it's just going to slowly drain our opponents and give us some incidental life gain. Orcish Bowmasters, 2 mana 1/1 flash when it enters the battlefield, and whenever someone draws their card, except for the first when they draw their draw steps, it deals 1 damage to any target, then amass Orcs 1. This is just such a good card draw hate piece in this deck, in any black deck at this point. Everyone knows how good Orcish Bowmasters is, and the amass token can get in with Gix if it gets big enough. Op Agent, 2 and a black for a 3/2 flash. You control your opponents while they're searching their libraries. Whenever an opponent searches in their library, they exile a card they find. You may cast those cards as long as they remain exiled, and you may spend mana as though they were mana of any color to cast them. Everyone knows Op Agent at this point. This will just shut down your opponent's tutors when they're trying to deal with our board, or possibly deal with a win con on the field or a win con that is coming. We just want to be able to stop our opponents from doing that. And it possibly can find answers to board states that black wouldn't normally be able to answer, such as enchantments, or mostly enchantments. Artifacts and enchantments. Next up, Cryptghast, 3 and a black for a 2/2 with Extort, and whenever you tap a swamp for mana, you add an additional swamp to your mana pool. This is just very good. I mean, we're playing mono black. Extort, I've already said how good that is in this deck, and the double mana will help us to just like dump our hand as soon as we draw a whole bunch of cards. This is a very good card in our deck. Gixian Puppeteer, 3 and a black for a 4/3. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life, and when it dies, return another target creature with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. We're going to trigger that first ability every single time with Gix out, slowly draining our opponents and getting some of that life back that we're paying. And when it dies, we get something back. We get another evasive creature back, or we could even send Grix to the graveyard and then return it to the battlefield once our Puppeteer dies. Grim Hireling, 3 and a black for a 3/2. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create 2 treasures, and then we can pay a black and sack X treasures. Target creature get -X/-X until the turn, activate only as a sorcery. This is going to be 4 mana. Every combat we get 6 treasures, and we could either use them to burn down some creatures, or we could just cast more spells with the 6 mana that we get. This card is so good in this deck. Shield of the Apocalypse, 2 and double black for 4/5 Death Touch. Whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life. Whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. Very simple, but very, very powerful, especially in this deck. I don't think I need to tell you guys how powerful Shieldred is. Some versions are over $100 at this point, played in almost every format. In this deck particularly, recuperating all the life that we're paying with Gix. Whenever we draw, we're just gaining life instead. And if our opponents want to draw with Gix, they're going to take a little bit more pain, losing 3 life for draw instead of 1. It's just so good in this deck, and especially once we draw the One Ring. Everyone knows how good Shieldred and the One Ring is together. Oh boy, gaining so much life. Grey Merchant, 3 and double black for a 2/4. When it enters, each opponent loses X life or X is your devotion of black. You gain life equal to the life lost this way. Most of the time, this will just be a life gain spell that will drain our opponents for 10, 8, something like that, but it can be a win con, as I'll show later on. We can just play them early, and then later on, when our opponents aren't expecting it, we can just kill them very easily, giving us life gain and damaging our opponents. Kirk, Son of Yawgmoth, 4 triple Phyrexian black, a 2/2 lifelink, and for each black in a cost, you may pay 2 life rather than pay that mana. Whenever you cast a black spell, put a +1 counter on Kirk, Son of Yawgmoth. So very good for the life gain, and he gets big really fast in this deck. And he just allows us to dump our hands so fast. A lot of our stuff usually saw just 1 black mana to play, so just 2 life instead allows us to save our mana for other things. So very good in this deck, and it's a kill on sight card for sure. Next up, we're on to our interaction. Feed the Swarm, 1 and a black, sorcery, destroy target creature, enchantment, and opponent controls. You lose life with that permanent's conveyed a mana cost. Just allows us to deal with problematic enchantments. Snuff Out, 3 and a black. If you control a swamp, you may pay 4 life rather than pay Snuff Out's mana cost. Destroy target non-black creature that can't be regenerated. This is just free interaction. Pay 4 life, kill something. Very good in our deck. Deadly Rollick, 3 and a black. If you control your commander, you may cast a spell without paying its mana cost. Exile target creature. Again, free interaction. Just exile a creature if we have Gix out. Dismember, 1 double Phyrexian. Target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn. 1 generic mana, kill something that's bothering us. Very good, very good. Toxic Deluge, 2 and a black. As an additional cost to cast a spell, pay X life. All creatures get -X/-X until end of turn. Most of the time, this will kind of hurt us a lot because all our creatures will die. But if we're kind of behind, this is a good spell to catch up with. Same with Damnation, 2 a double black, destroy all creatures that can't be regenerated. And the Meat Hook Massacre, very interesting in this deck. X double black, when it enters the battlefield, each creature gets -X/-X until end of turn. It's an enchantment, by the way, so this will stick around. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses life, and whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you gain a life. So this can just kill our opponents. If we have a big enough board, our opponents have been attacking each other, we've been attacking our opponents, their life total is getting low, we play a Meat Hook for 1, kill all our creatures, and our opponents lose 8 to 10 life and they just die. Another scenario is that we just wipe the board and gain a crap ton of life. I have gained 70 life off of this before, just casting it for X4, X5, you know. Just wipe the board, gain a lot of life. That'll keep us in the game, especially since we're paying lots of life. And this also sticks around as an enchantment, so it'll just be incidental life gain and life loss as the game goes on. This is just so good in this deck. Meat Hook Massacre is busted. And then Imp's Mischief, 1 in a black instant, change the target of target spell with a single target. You lose life equal to that spell's converted mana cost. This allows us to interact with the blue players and redirect counter spells or removal spells away from Gix. Most of the time that's what we use it for. It'll also protect our X spell win cons or permanent that we want to keep around. So this is just all around very good protection. Next up, the tutors. I'm going to roll through these really fast just because everyone knows what they are. A Demonic Tutor, 1 in a black, search your library for a card. Vampiric Tutor, pay 2 life, search your library for a card to put on top. Imperial Seal, pay 2 life, search your library for a card, put on top. And Diabolic Intent, 1 in a black, sack a creature, tutor for a card and put in your hand. All these cards, very good. I'm mentioning them here because this allows us to do what black does best. We want these cards, especially in this deck, because there'll get to a point where our opponents are going to outpace us. We're playing a lot of 1-drops in our deck, so we want to be able to get the cards that we need for each scenario. Like if we need a board wipe, if we need a win con, if we need more mana production, if we need removal for one specific creature, or if we need like a Feed the Swarm for an enchantment. These cards will keep us in the game a lot longer than if you were to not have them. So I just wanted to note how relevant and important the tutors are. I know that some of them are expensive, but they really are worth it, and you just can't skimp out on them. Next up, we're on to ending the game. I wanted to show you guys my win cons that I've put into this deck. I chose to exclude some of them, like Bolas's Citadel and Bolas's Citadel mainly because it's just so boring. I've done it too many times. Bolas's Citadel win is just blah. So instead, I decided to add some different combos. You don't get too many choices in mono black, but we do what we can with what we have. So I want to show you guys Bloodchief Ascension, 1 black enchantment. At the beginning of each end step, if an opponent lost 2 or more life this turn, you may put a quest counter on Bloodchief Ascension. And whenever a card is put to an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if Bloodchief Ascension has 3 or more quest counters on it, you may have that player lose 2 life. If you do, you gain 2 life. So this card can come down very early and gets turned on very fast. We could just incidentally poke our opponents. They can do it to themselves too. If they lose a mana clip flip, if one of our opponents attacks another opponent for the Gix draw, it gets a counter. You know, this will turn on very fast. And then whenever cards go to my opponent's graveyards from anywhere, they're losing 2, I'm gaining 2. So this keeps our life total high, and this slowly drains out our opponents until they can't do anything. They literally won't be able to play cards at a certain point if this sticks around long enough. Next up, Torment of Hellfire, X double black. Repeat the following process X times. Each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. This will be our main win con. This card, if we cast for 20, 30, X is 20 or 30, then we can just eliminate the entire table. They will not be able to come back from that. It's a little boring just because, like, Torment of Hellfire, I win the game, it's over. But sometimes we just kind of need to do that. Next up, Exsanguinate, X double black. Each opponent loses X life, you gain life equal to life lost this way. Sometimes we can cast this spell not for the wind, but just to like gain a whole bunch of life to keep us in the game. But this 100% can end the game. You can X this spell to just eliminate the entire table. So very good, nothing really else to be said there. I want to talk about Gary and Reanimate. Reanimate, put target creature from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. You lose life equal to that spell's converted mana cost. And we also have Animate Dead, 1 in a black, enchant creature in a graveyard. When it enters the battlefield, you just basically bring the creature back. This is a bunch of gobbledygook. It gets -1/-0, and it stays there as long as Animate Dead is attached to it. These can notably target any creature in any graveyard, so if we have an opponent that has something that we want, like maybe a Shieldred that's a huge target, or maybe some really big creature that can swing the game in our favor, we're obviously going to target their creatures. Sometimes I've even just reanimated Dauthi Voidwalker just because it's so good against the opponent I'm playing, if their deck is graveyard based or they have a combo that relies on their graveyard. But most of the time I'm saving these for a Gary to just maybe with my Phyrexian Tower sack the Gary and then reanimate him again to get the ETB trigger again and just finish off my opponents. Gary will just incidentally end up in my graveyard a lot of the time, I've noticed, so he's just pretty easy to take care of and end the game. I'll show you guys another win con here. We got Bitter Blossom and Contamination. Bitter Blossom is 1 and a black enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose a life and create a 1/1 black fairy rogue token with flying. This is just incidentally good in our deck. We can play this early on. Just keep getting 1/1 flyers to keep getting in with Gix. But with Contamination, 2 and a black enchantment, during your upkeep, sacrifice a creature or sacrifice a Contamination. And whenever a land is tapped for mana, it produces black instead of its normal type and amount. With Contamination and Bitter Blossom makes the token every turn to sack to Contamination to basically lock your opponents out from using their lands to tap for mana other than black. So they can still use their artifact mana ramp to make colors other than black, but this will severely hamper your opponents and allow you to get a few extra turns to just end the game with combat damage or another combo. Most of the time this won't completely lock your opponents out, but it can lock out 1 or 2 of your opponents and severely hamper another, and that'll basically get you to the point where you won't really have to worry about too much interaction on your part and you could just finish the game. And then don't forget about your commander as well. You can pay 4 and triple black to discard your hand basically, and just pick an opponent you think who has the best chance of getting you the win, whether they're playing extra turns or heal draw Eldrazi. You know, you can, the world is your ocean. Whoever you're playing against, if you want to steal their cards, go ahead. You're at one point in the game you're going to have a bunch of 1-drops and lands in your hand. Those cards are not going to be that influential. You can discard them away and find something hot off the top of your opponent's library. So there's always that. Let's get into some utility lands and then we'll close out the video here. Reliquary Tower, super important. We're obviously going to be drawing tons and tons of cards. We want to be able to keep them on our hand. Takenuma, we could discard it to mill 3 cards and return a creature to our hand. This can get back any important creature that our opponents have killed, like maybe the Grim Hireling, the Gary, our commander maybe, if it's costing a little bit too much and we send it to the graveyard. There's a lot of choices here with Takenuma. Shizu Death Storehouse, we could pay a black and tap it to give target legendary creature fear until the turn. There's quite a few legendary creatures in this deck, whether that be Kirk, Shieldred, or my commander, but most of the time it's just going to be giving Gix fear so that way Gix can get in himself and draw a card. Ancient Tomb, not much to be said here, just makes 2 colorless mana, deals a little bit of damage to us. It'll help us get out in front really fast in the early game. Gemstone Caverns, if it's in your opening hand and you're not the starting player, you may begin with Gemstone Caverns on the battlefield with a luck counter on it. If you do, exile a card from your hand, and it either makes colorless or 1 mana of any color depending on whether it has a luck counter or not. This will just help us get in front of the game really fast, either deploying 2 1-drops on turn 1, or maybe you play Gix on turn 1. Probably you're going to want to play the 1-drops first and then a turn 2 Gix. It's a very powerful start with the Gemstone Caverns. Phyrexian Tower, I mentioned it earlier, you can make a colorless mana or you can sack a creature to add double black to your mana pool. This will be very good for our deck. There's a lot of creatures to sacrifice in this deck that we don't really care about, so we can make a little bit extra mana, or if the creature's dying anyways, maybe we can go for a big turn. The world is your oyster with this card, or if the card wants to be sacrificed, like Gary, and you bring it back, that is also very good. And then Nykthos, you can make a colorless, or you can pay 2 colorless and tap it to choose a color. You obviously choose black, you make devotion equal to the color. As I mentioned, Gary will make a lot of devotion himself for his ability, so Nykthos will always make you 6 to 10 mana. Most of the time it'll always be mana positive, so you could always count on this being a very good land in your deck. Urborg, mentioned it earlier, each land is a swamp in addition to its other types. This is good for our swamp walk creatures. It's good to fix our mana if we draw a lot of colorless lands, and it's also very good with Cabal Coffers. You can pay 2 and tap it to add a black for each swamp you control. A classic combo, Urborg Cabal Coffers, makes us tons of mana for our X spells, and it could just be very good to deploy our hand very fast after drawing a lot of cards. And that'll do it. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know if there's any suggestions for cards that I missed. I thank you so much for watching to the end, and like and subscribe. I'll see you next time, guys. Bye.